Have you ever heard of the Sultan who saw his empire crumbling and tried desperately to save it? This is the story of Mustafa III, a ruler caught between a glorious past and a terrifying future. When Mustafa III came to the throne in 1757, the Ottoman Empire was like a grand old ship that had started to take on water. For centuries, it had been a superpower, a titan of the Mediterranean and beyond. But now, the world was changing fast, and the empire was struggling to keep up. Europe was in the midst of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. New technologies, new military tactics, and new political ideas were spreading like wildfire. Meanwhile, the Ottomans seemed to be stuck in time. Mustafa III was no fool. He wasn't blind to the cracks appearing in the foundations of his empire. He saw the military, once the most feared in the world, falling behind its European rivals. He saw the economy struggling and the administration becoming less efficient. Unlike some of his predecessors who might have ignored these warning signs, Mustafa was determined to act. He was a reformer at heart, a man who believed that with the right changes, the empire could be strong again. His primary focus was the army. He knew that military might was the backbone of Ottoman power. He looked at the armies of Europe, particularly their artillery and engineering corps, and saw a level of sophistication that the Ottomans lacked. So he did something quite radical for the time. He looked to the West for help. He invited European military advisors, engineers, and experts to Istanbul. Their mission was to modernize the Ottoman forces, especially the artillery. New foundries were built to cast modern cannons, and new schools were established to teach the science of engineering and ballistics. These weren't just cosmetic changes, they were the first serious, systematic attempts to bring European military technology into the heart of the Ottoman army. Imagine the scene. French and Prussian officers, in their distinct European uniforms, walking the grounds of the Topkapi Palace, instructing Ottoman soldiers on the latest siege techniques. It must have been a culture shock for many, a sign that the old ways were no longer enough. Mustafa was essentially trying to perform open-heart surgery on the military, while the patient was still awake. He believed that if he could just upgrade the hardware and software of his army, he could fend off the empire's enemies. And the biggest, most dangerous enemy was lurking to the north. Imperial Russia, led by the formidable Catherine the Great. The rivalry between the Ottoman and Russian empires defined the 18th century. They were two massive, expanding powers, constantly bumping up against each other in the Black Sea region, the Caucasus, and the Balkans. Tensions were always high, and it was only a matter of time before they exploded into all-out war. That moment came in 1768. The Russo-Turkish War was a conflict that would define Mustafa's reign and seal his legacy. He went into it with a degree of confidence, believing his military reforms would make a difference. But he was about to learn a harsh lesson. Patching up an old system is not the same as building a new one. The war was an unmitigated disaster for the Ottomans. On land, the Russian armies, led by brilliant generals, consistently outmaneuvered and defeated the larger Ottoman forces. The weaknesses of the Janissaries, the once elite infantry corps, were brutally exposed. They were brave, yes, but they were no match for the disciplined, well-drilled Russian line infantry armed with modern muskets and bayonets. But the most humiliating defeat came at sea. In 1770, a Russian fleet sailed all the way from the Baltic Sea, around Europe, and into the Mediterranean. This surprised the main Ottoman fleet at anchor in the Bay of Cesme, off the coast of Anatolia. In a catastrophic naval battle, the entire Ottoman fleet was annihilated. It was a shocking blow, not just militarily, but psychologically. The Ottomans, who had once dominated the seas, had been defeated in their own backyard by an enemy who had traveled thousands of miles. The news of these defeats weighed heavily on Sultan Mustafa. He was a deeply religious and conscientious man. He saw these failures not just as political or military setbacks, but as a personal burden, a sign of his own inadequacy in the eyes of God. Contemporary chronicles describe him as being overwhelmed with grief and anxiety. He would spend long hours in prayer, lamenting the state of his empire. He was also a poet, writing under the pen name Cihangir, which means conqueror of the world. The irony is heartbreaking. His poetry from this period is filled with sorrow and despair, reflecting the pain of a ruler watching his world fall apart. In his verses, he wasn't the conqueror of the world. He was a man struggling to hold on to what he had. As the war dragged on, the empire's treasury was drained dry. The cost of raising, supplying and paying the armies was astronomical. The economy, already fragile, was pushed to the breaking point. Morale across the state, from the highest officials in the palace to the common soldier in the field, plummeted. The dream of a quick, decisive reform had turned into a nightmare of endless defeat. Mustafa III would not live to see the end of the war. He died in 774, a man broken by the failures of his reign. His heart, it was said, simply gave out from the stress and sorrow. Just a few months after his death, his successor was forced to sign one of the most devastating treaties in Ottoman history, the Treaty of Küçük Kaynarca. This treaty was more than just a peace agreement. It was a profound humiliation. The Ottomans lost vast territories, including the strategically vital Crimea, which became independent before being annexed by Russia a few years later. But the most damaging clauses were political. Russia was granted the right to build an Orthodox Christian church in Istanbul, and more importantly, was given the right to act as the protector of the Orthodox Christian subjects living within the Ottoman Empire. This was a massive blow to Ottoman sovereignty. It gave Russia a permanent excuse to interfere in Ottoman internal affairs. From then on, any issue involving the Orthodox population could become an international crisis, with Russia claiming the right to intervene. It was the beginning of what would become known as the Eastern Question, the great diplomatic puzzle of the 19th century. What should be done with the sick man of Europe as the declining Ottoman Empire came to be known? So, how should we remember Mustafa III? He wasn't a weak or ignorant sultan. He was a man of vision and determination. He correctly identified the core problems facing his empire and made a sincere effort to fix them. His military reforms, though ultimately insufficient, were pioneering. They laid the groundwork for the more radical and successful modernization efforts of his successors, like Selim III and Mahmud II. His reign serves as a crucial lesson in history. It shows that good intentions are not always enough. Deep systemic problems require deep systemic solutions. Mustafa tried to put a modern engine into an old wooden ship, but the hull itself was rotten. The entire structure needed to be rebuilt, a task that would take decades of turmoil, rebellion, and even more radical reforms. Mustafa III's story is a tragedy, the story of a well-meaning ruler who presided over a military catastrophe. He stands at a critical turning point in Ottoman history, the moment when the long, slow decline became a terrifyingly rapid fall. His reign exposed the empire's weaknesses for all the world to see and fired the starting gun for a desperate, century-long race to modernize and survive. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating and often overlooked corners of history. See you next time.